Welcome to the MS-Perspektive podcast. Perspective with a K, as I'm German. I'm Nele Handwerker, MS patient, patient advocate and author. I'm bringing you interviews, inspiration and information about living with multiple sclerosis and show you ways how you can positively influence the disease and make the best out of your diagnosis. On ms-perspektive.com, you will find the show notes, 11 free tips as a PDF, and lots of other information. And now the show begins.
This podcast is supported by Mid-Mission, a project of the nonprofit Hertie Foundation.
Hello and welcome to episode number 35, Empowering People with MS to Live a Fulfilling Life. Interview with psychotherapist and coach Indu Khurana. Indu Khurana is an MS coach, a psychotherapist and MS patient, and she lives in Raleigh, St. Albans in the United Kingdom. And now enjoy the interview. Hello Indu, it's such a pleasure to have you on the show today and a warm welcome to Raleigh in United Kingdom.
Hi Nelly, good to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Before we start with the interview, Indu, it would be very lovely if you could introduce yourself to the audience so they know who is here with me on the show today.
Sure. So I am Indu, and I, as you said, I'm a coach and psychotherapist. I have been doing that for about 25, 30 years. But I started to focus on helping people with MS just in the last year. So that's a new focus.
Okay. And could you share a bit of your journey and background in supporting individuals with MS? So why did you make that change?
Sure. So partly I made that change because I made that change so late in the day because I needed to go through my own journey with MS. I was diagnosed in 2017, even though I had symptoms since my 31st birthday, actually, which was 30 years before. But diagnosed very late in the day. And partly because I started my business full-time last year, just in September 22, and I felt strong enough within myself, having gone through my own journey, to support others facing the difficulties that I had faced in the previous years. And I felt like I had something to offer. And over the 25 years of not having the correct diagnosis, I'd obviously researched a lot and tried to address my own symptoms that had the wrong diagnosis, but I tried to address them in natural and alternative ways. So I ended up learning a lot about myself, my body, our bodies, the human bodies, and how everything interacts.
Sounds good. So what inspired you to focus on empowering individuals living with MS and adopting a personalized approach to their well-being?
Well, I guess starting my own business full-time last year, I needed to find a focus that resonated with my heart. And I had worked in the British NHS for a long time, NHS being the National Health Service. And I had also been a patient of it for a long time, enough for me to know that their model, the medical model in the UK, the compartmentalization, doesn't really work for the human being that we are. And my way of working has always been about seeing the whole individual in front of me. And I've always been passionate about that because I feel like as time has progressed, society has moved further and further away from seeing the individual into a more kind of, compartmentalized view, which is really not accurate in my view of us. And so my way of delivering psychotherapy and coaching, that individualized way, fits really well with MS and autoimmune conditions generally, actually, because these illnesses present so differently and individually in every person they find.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So that's my inspiration.
So maybe can you go a bit more into the details and explain your unique personalized approach in helping individuals with MS achieve their goals and overcome the challenges that they are facing?
Sure. I guess the best way to explain it is that my approach is personalized to the person in front of me in any given moment, because each person has a different context. So not only how the illness manifests in their body, but also their life contexts. And the different systems they belong to. So I combine my knowledge of kind of psychotherapy and coaching trainings and experience with the different contexts, so their work environment, their family life, their friendship circles, their relationships in all of those areas, and also their relationship to themselves, which I think is really important, and therefore their relationship to the illness, to MS. And so I combine all of those things, and they weave in and out according to what we need for that individual person. So we find a different route for each person to help them overcome the challenges that they might be facing along the way, because everybody faces different challenges at different points in their lives and in slightly different ways because of slightly different contexts. So you have to I feel you have to tailor it really specifically to the person in front of me. And I believe that we have to look at all of these different aspects, not just the symptoms, because MS affects every single part of our lives, not just the body.
True. And it's very important to have that individualized care, and I totally agree. And you have to like yourself and like your body. And some people, I realized, are really mad at their bodies because they think it's let's say it's becoming an enemy because there is EMS, and that's normally not a good approach to look at your body and your health.
Absolutely. And although some people start to hate their body because of the MS, there's an awful lot of people who hated their body anyway before the MS came along. And sometimes the MS can be an expression of that dislike. And that, they've been disliking their bodies for such a long time that it becomes symbolic because the MS attacks them in the way that they are hating their body. So I use symbolism in my work as well to kind of personalize it all.
So how do you try to get them back to balanced and to regain control over their lives?
Well, control comes from understanding what is happening in a person and why. And so that's the basic foundation of our work. You have to understand the psychological process of what's led you to this point in your life. And that's not to say that you've created MS, but it's about what occurred that has contributed to you becoming unwell. And there is always clues, and we can learn a lot through the symbolic understanding of symptoms. So once a client understands these things at an emotional level, it then feeds through into the kind of more spiritual as well as the physical level. And we can then implement appropriate strategies to address the challenges they face. Because when they understand it, the changes that you try to make in your life will stick more solidly, and you'll be able to implement them in a committed way. And so it's much, much easier to find a point of balance by understanding what's going on, why.
Mm-hmm. And could you maybe provide an example of a transformative journey you've been part of, highlighting the positive changes the individual has experienced?
Sure. I had one client who started with very low mood, really low energy, poor motivation. She was really struggling with fatigue, managing her work as well as running a household. So we looked at her symptoms and what they meant, and we kind of thought about the symptoms as her body's language and what were the symptoms trying to tell her. So part of the work that I did was about teaching her to start to understand the language of her body. And the more she started to learn and understand that, the more she was able to make changes. And she was able to make changes in her home environment, in her work life, and her mindset as well. And that was the biggest kind of thing, the mindset. But she was really good. She was desperate for help, and therefore she trusted me. And I explained along the way why things were happening, how it linked to the language of her body. And because she understood it, she was able to make the changes and start to build new habits. And she also started to develop an openness about what she needed and to be able to tell others, like her work colleagues, what she needed in order to be able to still function and function well, perform well. But to kind of explain to them that if she didn't get X, then it would have this impact, and therefore she needed this, and she would still be able to perform. So we had to look at the systems that she functioned within, and look at them in quite a lot of detail. And she learned so much, and she was very happy. There was more work to be done, but she was so at the point where we finished the work, she had reached a point where work was getting busy. She needed to start implementing certain strategies that we'd spoken about, and it just felt too much to have any more strategies. So we paused the work so that she could implement the things she'd learned already, get them into a solid habit, and start to see some significant changes in her life. And then if she wanted to come back, she could. So that felt like a really good piece of work.
That's good. So looking at the situation, looking at the possibilities, and then find, let's say, new ways to get along with your circumstances.
Exactly.
Of the disease, but also of the environment you are living in. That sounds like a very reasonable way. You have explained that, of course, it's always individualized, but I guess there are still a few common obstacles that people with MS face. And how do you help them to overcome these challenges?
Well, yeah, it takes time. One of the biggest obstacles that seems to exist with people with MS, I've noticed a lot, is that they've generally forgotten the language of their body. So we do quite a lot of work around relearning the language of their body for them to learn to listen to it. And that's quite a big one, because people are not used to listening. People, certainly I notice this a lot with within the population who have MS, that they've almost kind of disconnected from their bodies, because, you know, our lives in the Western world certainly teaches us to just do. Our bodies get kind of forgotten. And yet our bodies are giving very strong signals. So I teach them to reconnect. And then there's also, I found that there's a very poor understanding of MS amongst the general public. So we do have to kind of, although it's another kind of one more thing to do, but as a person with MS, we have to teach people around us. And we have to teach them about my version of MS, because it'll be different to your version of MS and so on. And that's partly why I've started to share the kind of details of difficulties in my social media posts, because people just don't understand. And by giving them examples and by sharing that, I'm hoping that it will increase the general public's knowledge, but also give confidence to the person who has MS to share some of their details about how it's affecting them, because that's really important.
Yeah.
And then I guess the other thing is that people with MS seem to have a bit of a difficulty around stress management and anxiety management, and they, how should we put it? They experience anxiety and stress a lot, but they don't know how to manage it, and they don't seem to have the resources or the habits to bring their stress and anxiety levels down. And I think part of the stress cycle is because, or the anxiety cycle is because for some people with MS, that part of the brain that affects those emotional responses is affected by a lesion or two. And so it kind of feels like out of control. So we have to teach the people to create new neural pathways. And that means forming new habits and doing things differently and trying things, being brave enough to try things differently, and trusting that what's happening is that they are forming neural pathways that bypass the lesions in the brain, so that they can start to bring down their stress and anxiety levels and therefore cope with life a little better.
Yes, it's so important. I mean, if you are totally stressed out or if you are full of anxiety, you can't become proactive. You are just passive, and it's a spiral downwards, but not upwards. So
yeah, exactly.
Such an important topic. I think it is already quite clear that you prioritize mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical well-being. How do these aspects come together in your approach and the support of individuals with MS?
Well, it's really hard to have a set formula for this, because obviously you're dealing with individuals, and MS is individual in every single person.
It is.
However, what I have learned is that if we don't pay attention to the emotional and kind of mental well-being, then the physical side is going to speak up, whether that's through decline or exacerbation of your symptoms. It varies. So you have to address the emotional first, and it's almost like if you can commit to addressing the emotional, then the physical follows. So that's always my focus, to start with that. Obviously, if with a person the physical is manifesting in quite an acute way, and sometimes medication can make that acuteness happen. So we have to kind of address the physical side first, but that doesn't mean that we don't address the emotional as well. You have to address the emotional. So the different aspects have to weave together, and they have to be woven in that individual way that fits with the person in front of me.
Yeah. Can you maybe share some strategies or practices that you recommend for cultivating resilience in the face of MS-related difficulties?
Do you know, one of the best practices that I think a person can do is to start journaling. This is actually a really powerful way or a strategy, because it works at so many different levels. It allows you to get the emotions out of you, first of all, because we know that holding the emotions in your body is not good for you, particularly when you have MS. And then having them written in black and white in front of you allows you to start looking for clues about what the context is, what the effect of that context is, and then we can think about how to address that. It's also, writing can be, once you get into the rhythm of it, can be quite a meditative activity. And we know that these kind of creative, meditative activities help to calm the nervous system down. So it works at that kind of real internal physical level as well. And once you start to see patterns, you can actually take action and be proactive about it.
Yeah, I love writing habits. I mean, I'm doing pretty well. So, but whenever I have the issue that anxiety is coming back for some reason, I use writing, and I love to do the automatic writing as well, where I get connected to the thoughts that are not that obvious there, but are beneath the obvious structure, and it's so fascinating. And they lose power when you write them down, because if they spin around in the head, and the head is fantastic round, exactly, they spin around and they become more powerful, and but the actual thing isn't. So exactly, writing is a great thing. Yeah. How do you help your clients identify and unlock their strengths, even when they might feel overwhelmed by their condition?
Do you know, a lot of people with MS have completely lost connection to their strengths. And so we have to kind of start a process of very gently starting to, as the emotional work goes on, starting to ask them. So I will ask them, so what do you learn from X situation? What do you learn from this situation? And I also ask them, so in terms of this, what have you already achieved? And sometimes I will name it for them, because they're so disconnected they can't see it for themselves. So I will say, oh, well done, you've achieved X. And you know, noticing at the very small levels, because we often ignore those tiny little wins. And slowly, by me pointing out, me asking, they start to see it. And also the journaling helps with this as well. And they start slowly to shift into a place of greater resilience, so that they can start to identify their own strengths. It takes time because it's changing a habit, but they do get there eventually.
That's great. And what role does goal setting play in your approach to working with individuals with MS? And how do you help them set and achieve these goals?
Well, goal setting is quite a key component in my work. I may not always call it goal setting, but, sometimes the term goal setting can feel very corporate. And so sometimes I ask them what they want to achieve. And we then keep that in focus. And we have to we still use kind of the SMART approach. Is it realistic within the time frame we have? Is it viable? And sometimes we need to break it down. But we have to keep that achievement, that goal, in focus and at the center of the work so that we don't lose connection with it. And that way we're always guided in the right direction.
Sounds good, yes. And I remember my own psychotherapy where I was going when we wanted to become mom and dad, and was not an easy part. And my psychotherapist helped me in how I can bring that component into life. And then I started to write children's books and reading for children and doing things like that. And I got relaxed. And finally, I was pregnant. And it worked out, but I think I would have been fine if it wouldn't have worked out, because I found that, let's say, bringing that aspect of being together with kids in a nice way and doing something good to them and to me, of course, myself. So that was very interesting. And I think I wouldn't have reached that point without psychotherapy. So that was very, very interesting.
I'm glad.
How do you assist individuals in finding meaning and purpose in their lives beyond the challenges of MS?
Great question. I guess once we deal with the other stuff, the emotional reactions, the obstacles placed by life, their employer, we can look at the learning. We can think together about what they want to do. Sometimes people with MS lose their way because the illness consumes them. So they lose the meaning, they lose the purpose in their lives, and we have to recreate them. And I sometimes use creative ways. So art, for example, is a great way to help them to start, and writing as well, to start visualizing a different purpose and a different meaning in their life. Because inevitably MS changes our life and our life trajectory. And the hopes and dreams that we had before, the purpose that was driving us before, may not work anymore, depending on how MS is affecting you. So creative methodologies really, really come into their own with that, and that helps them to find their true north.
Yeah. Can you maybe share in that context of successful life journey an inspiring experience from your work with someone living with MS?
Well, I think I spoke about that in the example I gave earlier, where that lady achieved a level of success in learning about herself. And I felt that was an inspiring experience because she was able to go away and she was able to say, actually, I need to pause this work, which, she before we started working, she hadn't been able to say no or stop. And through our work, she learned to put boundaries around her. And she demonstrated that by being able to say, actually, I need to pause this work. And that was, I thought, for me, that was particularly inspiring because so many people with MS, so many people don't know how to say no.
Mm-hmm.
And to their own detriment. And one of the big things I've learned is that putting boundaries in place, putting yourself first, which is not selfish, but just, it's that airplane gas mask analogy, that if you don't give yourself the oxygen first, you're not going to be well enough to give the oxygen to other people. So you have to take the oxygen first. And it's a similar thing. She had to put the boundaries in place. She had to start looking and thinking about herself first in order to help others. And to and that meant putting boundaries in place both at home with her loved ones and at work. And so the fact that she was able to say that with me felt like a really, really big step forward.
Great. So what types of ongoing support and resources do you provide to individuals after they started the transformative journey with you? I mean, of course, that lady, she said, stop, but I guess for some people it might be an on-off communication with you whenever they are in need.
Absolutely. And that is one of the things I do offer, that you can come back for refreshers or top-ups if you need to. I also am planning, I haven't yet sorted this out, but I am planning to offer short creative courses through my website so that you can build up your tank of reserve and resilience again. And that will provide kind of periodic stop-off points for people. When they've done a piece of work, they can book in to do these creative workshops. And it just helps to build them up and also teach them new tricks, new tools.
Sounds good. So let's come to the quickfire Q&A session. Complete the sentence. For me, multiple sclerosis is?
Yet another thing we can learn from.
Which website can you recommend for people living with MS?
So there is a small charity in the UK which I really like, their ethos, because they are about genuine support for people with MS. I feel it's an organisation called MS UK. They have a lot of resources and different workshops. And then, of course, my own website, although it's being rebuilt at the moment, will eventually be worth a visit because it will have resources there as well.
Sounds good. And I will ask you for the address. And of course, I will bring it into the blog article as well. But let's keep on with another question. What development would you like to see in the field of multiple sclerosis in the next 5 years?
Well, I'm an idealistic person, so I'd like to see a cure, please.
I mean, Stephen Hauser was talking about that at ACTRIMS for a small group of people. When you early detect it in families who have a high incidence, and you can probably find out a certain setting, and then you would start treatment, and they would never turn into this stage of MS. So that would be a reasonable goal as of now.
I'd like to see a cure for people like me.
I know that will take a bit longer and not 5 years. I think that's very idealistic. I mean, sometimes great things happening, but yeah, sounds hard. Sounds very hard. We need quite some magic to have that happen.
That's what I'm hoping for, magic.
So finally, what message or advice would you like to share with individuals living with MS who might be listening to our podcast?
Start to listen to your body and keep monitoring your hope levels. If you find your hope levels drifting or declining, get some help.
Yep. So, and how and where can interested people find you online, Indu?
So I'm on, so my website is www.indukhurana.com, and I can give you that address spelt out because it's not the greatest spelling for English-speaking people. INDUKHURANA.com. And I'm on Facebook, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Twitter, and I'm on Instagram. So pretty easy to find.
Very good. And as said before, I will put that all in the show notes and of course in the blog article. So if you were not writing the address down, you can just check it up. Indu, thanks a lot for all you are doing. Thanks for that inspirational interview. And of course, good luck. And, I hope your wish comes true, but 5 years for healing. When you have for a longer time MS, keeps fingers crossed, of course. But I think that's really a hard task.
Thank you, Nelly. And thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts here today. And I'm going to be keeping my fingers and toes crossed.
Of course. For toes crossed. Oh, you are good. And I can't do that with my toes, but yeah. Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed the interview and learned something new, and maybe got inspired by Indu to take a bit more care of your personal feelings, of your well-being. And yes, I think it is very important to be balanced emotionally and to take on the challenges that come with living with a chronic disease. By the way, next time I will talk about rehabilitation in MS, or for short RIMS, and that will be an interview with Dr. Lars Witt about the scope and project. Dr. Lars Witt is an associate professor and senior researcher at Aarhus University and communication officer at RIMS in Denmark. RIMS is a very large initiative and they concentrate on diverse topics, and we will talk about all this as rehabilitation is important, as unfortunately we can't avoid all things happening to us MS patients, so rehabilitation is really key. So please tune in again and see you next time. And of course, please recommend the podcast to everybody who might be interested in it, and I would love to hear from you as this makes it more of a conversation. Thank you for listening today. I hope you found it helpful. You may also be interested in the previously published episodes and posts, which you can find at ms-perspektive.com/podcast. Perspective with a K. You can also get a free PDF with 11 tips for your positive impact on MS at ms-perspektive.com/newsletter. If you'd like to get in touch, you can reach me at nele@ms-perspektive.com or on social media. Hear you next time.